This week on Viewpoints.
The coral animal itself actually has a translucent skeleton.
Why coral reefs are more than just a pretty underground landscape. Then,
what this process with the executive order has reminded me is that liberty and literacy cannot defend itself.
Why so many libraries are struggling to stay alive. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth this week on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints. Have you ever seen a coral reef up close in person? Many can't say they have. These vibrant colonies come in all colors, shapes, and sizes and are typically found in clear, shallow tropical waters across the globe. Corals have existed for over 400 million years and are home to thousands of underwater species. But you might be surprised to hear that they aren't rocks or even plants like many assume. They're animals.
They're these little polyps that are kind of like a sea anemone shape, but they also build outside of their body these limestone structures, and those structures are all different shapes and sizes and have holes and nooks and crannies, and so it really is like a city structure where tons and tons of animals find their homes in the different parts of the coral reef.
That's Dr. Julie Burwald, an ocean expert and author of the new book, Life on the Rocks, Building a Future for Coral Reefs. She says scientists estimate that around a quarter of all marine species live on coral reefs at some point in their life.
A lot of animals in the ocean have larvae forms, and then they mature into adults, like caterpillars into butterflies. And the larval forms of many, many marine species find their homes on the reef. So it's kind of like a nursery for marine creatures.
Without these reefs, many species wouldn't have a safe place to grow, mate, and thrive. Remember the Pixar movie Finding Nemo? Marlin and his son Nemo, who are clownfish, live in the Great Barrier Reef off the coast of Queensland, Australia. The Great Barrier Reef is the largest coral reef system in the world, stretching over 1,400 miles. The early part of the film follows Nemo as he grows up in the protective walls of the colorful coral, surrounded by a bustling community of fish, crustaceans, and larger species like turtles, the living coral essentially acting as an underwater metropolis. So, what happens when this habitat disappears? To begin with, it jeopardizes the future of thousands of underwater animals. But humans also rely on coral too.
Because so many animals depend on the reefs, they grow up, a lot of them are fish, and they grow up to be fish that people catch. And so then it's estimated that between 500 million and 1 billion people rely on the reefs for their primary source of protein.
On top of this, coral reefs act as an important physical barrier between tropical land masses and violent ocean weather patterns.
The coral reefs act as a huge absorber of wave energy. And when storms come hurling at tropical islands, they can absorb like 97% of the energy from storms. They're the best wave barrier we know of.
Coral reefs play so many distinct roles that provide countless benefits to not only underwater species, but humans as well. However, in recent decades, as temperatures in the ocean warm, these organisms have been dying in record numbers in a phenomenon known as mass bleaching. To understand this occurrence, it's first important to have a basic knowledge of what these unique corals are made up of.
The coral animal itself actually has a translucent skeleton, a translucent body. And so you see, if there weren't these little tiny symbiotic algae called zooxanthellae living inside the coral, it's a symbiotic relationship, then all you would see is the clear coral, transparent coral animal over the white skeleton. So the color comes through this symbiotic relationship between the coral and the algae. And there are different types of zooxanthellae, and so there are different colors of coral.
That's Dr. Helen Fox, the Conservation Science Director at the Coral Reef Alliance. Fox highlights that the algae living inside the coral is part of an incredible symbiotic relationship that creates the bright, colorful reefs we see.
The plants photosynthesize, and that energy is basically food for the corals. But then the coral, because it's an animal, it makes waste. So nitrogen and phosphorus, just like human poop, basically. And that is like fertilizer for the plants. So that's how they grow. And also because of that process, that helps the coral animals secrete the calcium carbonate skeleton. So when you see a big boulder coral and then it grows, basically you're seeing it grows as it accretes, or branching corals, they grow and spread as the calcium carbonate accretes.
But when the environment changes, this symbiotic relationship comes to an end and the algae and coral separate, causing the coral to starve and change in color in a process known as bleaching. Burwald says that massive coral reef bleaching events were first observed in the 1980s, but since then have become more common.
When it first happened, I think scientists sort of thought it was a one-off, like, oh, there's a really bad El Nino this year that brought a heat wave across the Pacific Ocean, and that caused the corals to bleach over a huge swath of the ocean. But then in 1996, there was another one. And then in the early 2000s, there were more. And so I think the awareness that coral bleaching wasn't going away broke into the media's consciousness around that time in the early 2000s. And so there was a lot of coverage at that time. And since then, they haven't gone away. The mass bleachings just continue and continue.
While these events are becoming more frequent, experts like Burwald say that coral reefs can sometimes revive themselves after these events.
If the water cools down, the coral can be reinfected with algae and it will recover. And what we're finding in today's oceans, which is really fascinating, I think, is that sometimes the coral are being recolonized with a different kind of algae that actually has a higher thermotolerance, so it can stay in the coral at higher water temperatures. But this other kind of algae, it's a little more selfish, and it doesn't feed the coral nearly as much sugar, so only about 60% of the sugar that it makes. So the coral is teaming up with a new business partner, basically, who is paying it less rent. It's a tough trade-off, but it may be what the coral need to do to survive the warming seas.
Fox says that organizations like the Coral Reef Alliance are focused on protecting several areas of coral reef so they don't permanently die off before they have a chance to adapt.
Supporting diversity and keeping corals healthy in those areas through the threat reduction that we were talking about is the best way to support their evolutionary processes, so that hopefully in the long run, if we get our act in gear on climate change and those carbon emissions do start to drop rapidly and quickly, there will be the genetic diversity to help ensure that corals can evolve and adapt to the future conditions of the world.
Another threat to coral reefs is declining water quality caused by human activity. This pollution can also create an unstable environment for the corals and the many species living in the vicinity.
The human development, for example, if there is construction or logging, things like that, or agriculture, there's often runoff from that. And, when it rains, then there's dirt and silt and things like that run off the land into the ocean. So I'm remembering I was diving once in the Solomon Islands for a research project, and you could see the former structure, like when I was talking about what it's like to dive among coral reefs, like you could see that there used to be this three-dimensional, beautiful structure of coral reef, but it was all covered with silt. And so there had been a lot of logging upland. And anytime it rained, instead of being clear water, it was like basically like diving in soup. We could barely see because there was so much silt and runoff from that.
And Fox adds that there have been cases of human sewage making its way into the ocean, leading to greater rates of disease in corals.
That extra nitrogen and all of the things from untreated wastewater or agriculture, things like that, cause the algae to grow, the water to get murky, which isn't good for corals. And also a lot of that human wastewater includes pathogens. So there's been a big increase in coral diseases, and that has also been traced to basically mismanagement or lack of management of human sewage.
Burwald says that with the many challenges facing this species, some scientists are predicting that 99% of corals will be dead by 2050. While pollution plays a role in this, climate change is the biggest driver threatening the future of coral reefs.
Getting the heating of our planet under control is really, really the most important thing we can do for the health of the coral reef.
The decline of healthy coral reefs is a great loss to Earth's biodiversity and is just one of the countless negative impacts of climate change. To learn more about this topic and our guests, Helen Fox and Julie Burwald, head to viewpointsradio.org. This segment was written and produced by Amira Zaveri and originally aired in April 2022. Our studio manager is Jason Dickey. I'm Gary Price.
Coming up, it's been a wild and unexpectedly stressful year for a place many of us love when Viewpoints returns. Earlier this year, President Donald Trump issued an executive order that would have dismantled the Institute of Museum and Library Services, or the IMLS. It was formed in 1996 and is the only federal agency dedicated to supporting the nation's libraries. Currently, there are 125,000 local branches across the U.S. Without this overarching organization, many local libraries, especially those in small and rural communities, wouldn't be able to survive. So, what drove this surprising order, and why does the IMLS matter so much? The action came from the Department of Government Efficiency, which is commonly referred to as DOGE. For much of this year, the agency made headlines for its controversial government reductions and layoffs. As of this month, DOGE was dismantled and no longer exists. As for the IMLS, the initial push by DOGE to break apart the institute was ultimately reversed in court. But for tens of thousands of libraries, it still had an impact, and the move sent a clear message that their funding and future isn't a government priority.
When the executive order was issued by the president in March to dismantle the IMLS, it caused utter chaos and fear, frankly, in the libraries across the nation, because disproportionately those dollars that come out of the IMLS and go to the states are utilized to support services and resources for the small and rural libraries of each state.
That's Kate Laughlin, Executive Director of the National Association for Rural and Small Libraries. While big city libraries often have several ways to bring in reliable funding, like private donorship and endowments, most rural locations don't have the same luxury.
In the small and rural libraries, that doesn't exist. It's often one building with a few staff. Maybe there's a degreed librarian, maybe not, depending on the state. And there is no foundation, and there's no IT department, and there's no marketing department. And so it's not just the resources, the training, the support that the state library provides using those IMLS funds, but they will often be the provider of internet services, IT support. They will often be the group purchase power for the state's interlibrary loan service or circulation software, or even internet access itself. And if you cannot afford in a small or rural library to pay for circulation software or internet access on your own without that support, how do you even serve as a library anymore?
This past November, a U.S. district court ruled against the current administration's attempt to dismantle the IMLS and ordered DOGE to put the department back together. However, the damage was already done. 2 months before the court's ruling, the entire IMLS staff of about 80 people was let go.
Those people had left. My understanding is at this point they're at maybe 30 staff, and it's very hard to administer the programs and services and grant programs of the prior to March IMLS when you're working at a third of your staff nearly.
In addition, because most IMLS grants operate on a reimbursement model, many local libraries couldn't afford to wait for the court's reversal and had to make cuts right away.
Libraries had to determine what they were going to do with their budgets and how they were going to continue to support their communities. So shortening the budgets and tightening them up on collections, cutting programs, cutting hours. In some cases, when it's been coupled with really pernicious state legislation, we're seeing some libraries shutter their doors in terms of hours or even just entirely.
That's Sam Helmick, president of the American Library Association. The reality is that smaller libraries and the IMLS will need some time to recover from what happened this year. For now, funding for next year appears to be safe. But if the IMLS can't build back its staff quickly enough, dispersing those funds into local libraries could see delays. When the agency is at full capacity, Laughlin says it uses funds extremely efficiently. For example, in Arkansas, state library officials calculated that they spend about $850,000 a year on statewide subscriptions using their IMLS grant, a price they can only get by negotiating as a single large buyer. But if each library had to purchase these same resources on its own, the cost would skyrocket.
They figured out that if all the libraries had to purchase independently those services, subscriptions, resources, it would come to approximately $55 million. That's how efficient those dollars are in having our state library agencies administer them on behalf of the small and rural communities of each state. And when you look at the claim of inefficient use or fraudulent use of funding and that sort of thing that were the premise for a lot of these executive orders, that's just not the case. Anyone who's in close and sees what goes on with these dollars knows that the return on investment on every dollar that we spend out of the IMLS, the libraries turn around and turn it into $4 to $5 at minimum.
And in rural areas where alternative sources of funding are scarce, Laughlin says that a missed payment has immediate impacts on the local community, as libraries offer far more than books.
When you have a small rural community whose industry is dying or is dead, and there are whole groups of adults who never really learned how to use a mouse or even have an email address, and they're showing up at their local library saying to the librarian, "How does the internet work? Can you help me?" That's happening every single day. And the librarians, the library workers are sitting down with these small community members and helping them sign up for their first email address, helping them navigate the internet, then helping them be able to do job searching, job coaching, resume writing, these things that they would be left behind. If you cannot use the internet, if you do not have an email address, how do you apply for jobs? How do you apply for job development and training? How do you apply for resources if your family's in trouble and you need to get on whatever list, but you're out in a rural area, there's no office to visit. You have to go online.
Laughlin points out that public library internet is often used for telehealth visits, a convenient option that's rapidly grown in popularity in rural areas. Libraries are also invaluable for education, research, and anyone looking for a free third space to work, learn, or just safely exist in a place that's not home. But above all these benefits, Helmick reminds us that our founding fathers stressed the importance of libraries from the very beginning.
We know that 250 years ago, our founders actually heavily invested in libraries for a very specific reason. This is a unique form of government, and they claim to be trying to create a more perfect union, which suggests that they recognize that you and I would need to grow over time and attempt to become more perfect. You can't do that without access to information, because access to information It informs your decisions, it informs your civic engagement, and it gives you the opportunity to develop and grow. And so when Americans do not have access to their libraries, they don't have access to opportunity to grow. They don't have the opportunity to have a more perfect union and to grow as a nation. We lose some of our economic development, our literacy rates, our connection, but I would even argue our national security, because a literate and educated and informed nation is a safer one. We lose a lot when we don't have access to our libraries.
As the IMLS recovers from the fallout of the executive order and its eventual reversal, many libraries will need support from people like you and me. Helmick says there are several ways you can give back to ensure your local branch stays open.
What this process with the executive order has reminded me is that liberty and literacy cannot defend itself. So thank you for showing up for your libraries, whether that's getting a card, using the library, or reaching out to your representatives. You can find out more at ala.org/advocacy.
To find out more about Kate Laughlin, Sam Helmick, and all of our featured guests, visit viewpointsradio.org. For more behind the scenes, check out Viewpoints Radio on X, Facebook, and Instagram. This segment was written and produced by Grace Galanti and Amira Zaveri. Our studio manager is Jason Dickey. I'm Marty Peterson.
Viewpoints returns in just a moment.
And now, a Progressive ad brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Drivers who switch to Progressive could save big with Progressive. This has been a Progressive ad from Progressive. See if you could save at 1-800-PROGRESSIVE or progressive.com.
This is Viewpoints Explained. I'm Ebony McMorris. Earlier this year, Mount Rushmore made headlines after a Republican lawmaker floated the idea of adding President Donald Trump's face to the monument. If this happened, Trump would be the fifth face on the portrait, joining George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln. As the story grew, the National Park Service dismissed any new construction plans. According to experts, the granite rock is already fractured, and any new blasting could compromise the whole mountain. While this wild idea only lasted for a short time, it made us think, what else don't we know about Mount Rushmore? For one, the faces of the four presidents weren't part of the original vision. Historians wanted a statue that celebrated Western history and featured icons like Lewis and Clark, Buffalo Bill, and Native American Lakota Chief Red Cloud. But the sculptor in charge of the project had other ideas. He wanted it to be a national monument that drew national crowds instead of a smaller regional focus. Today, the almost 100-year-old sculpture is also the result of some extreme engineering. 400 men, from miners to sculptors to rock climbers, worked on the mountain, and about 90% of the work was done with dynamite. By the end, the workers had cleared more than 450,000 tons of rock. The project, which started in 1927, stretched on for 14 years, largely from funding delays, bad weather, and the sheer scale of the portraits. In the end, the monument reflects the priorities of the post-World War I landscape it was built in. It's a national symbol of America's birth and its values of freedom, democracy, and opportunity. Even today, Rushmore is still one of the most iconic landmarks in the world, drawing close to 2.5 million visitors to South Dakota every year. That's Viewpoints Explained for this week. More in a moment.
Welcome to Culture Crash, where we examine what's new and old in entertainment. The new film Train Dreams, which is now streaming on Netflix, is a powerful meditation on the American dream, life in the early 1900s, and grief. The film is based on a novella of the same name by Dennis Johnson. It revels in the visual splendor of the Pacific Northwest and settles in to document the fictional life of character Robert Granier, a railroad worker and logger looking to make a way for his family and himself. The film was shot in just 29 days, but director Clint Bentley made the most of his time, and his film features a stunning turn from lead actor Joel Edgerton and some of the most beautiful cinematography of the year, courtesy of director of photography Adolfo Veloso. After making its premiere at the Sundance Film Festival, Train Dreams was quickly acquired for distribution by Netflix, something of a double-edged sword for a small art house drama. On the one hand, Netflix helps ensure a small movie like this gets seen on a global stage, but on the other, the lack of a proper theatrical release means most viewers won't get to see this beautiful cinematography on the grandest of scales. No matter how you see the movie, though, Train Dreams is a beautiful character study about life in another time, and the human emotions that transcend time period and setting altogether. Intimate and emotional while still sweeping and epic, Train Dreams is one of the best films of 2025. I'm Evan Rook.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows and find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints.